Good afternoon and morning, depending where you are. The webinar will begin shortly. Before we do get started, we wanted to share a few housekeeping items to help make this a smooth process. Thank you for joining. We want to be sure that this is an interactive opportunity. So you'll see something a bit unusual in terms of how you may have participated in webinars in the past. We'll have a fun mock session, but we also want to get your questions and comments. So throughout the entire presentation, if you do have a comment, please feel free to chat us. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature that's on your panel. Usually it's either on the lower side or on the right. We do offer closed captioning, Zoom technical support. And if there's anything that you need from us, you can chat out to the panelists. Your feedback is important, and so we want to let you know now that we are hoping that you'll stick around with us and fill out a feedback form. We will chat out this link so that you have it. And we want to make sure this is an ongoing conversation, so please feel free to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. With that, I'd like to officially welcome you to the virtual workshop, Understanding the NIH Peer Review Process. Next slide. Our anchor host is the National Institute on Aging, but we're joined by several entities across NIH. I'd like to acknowledge the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, the Center for Scientific Review, and our umbrella agency, the National Institute of Health. Next slide, please. We have several key featured speakers. Our keynote speaker will be Dr. Richon. We will also have Dr. Todd Haim from NIA, Stephanie Fertig from the HHS Small Business Program and SEED at NIH, Lili Portilla from NCATS, Dr. Zane Martin, Program Director from the National Institute on Aging, Derrick Tabor. Dr. Derrick Tabor is from the NIA, National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities. We're also pleased to welcome Dr. Cathleen from the Center for Scientific Review, and Dr. Lyndon Joseph from the National Institute on Aging and the Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology. Next slide, please. We will do welcome and introduction so that you have an understanding of our agenda here, but also our keynote speaker will be Dr. Richon. He will give you a review of the small business application and NIH process. This webinar was done in response to feedback that we heard from many of you, and we have done some market research on what our grantees want to hear. And this is a topic that we know has generated a lot of interest. So we hope that by the end of this session, you'll have a really good understanding of our review process. And then we'll undertake an actual mock peer review and have a moderated Q&A. Next slide, please. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Richon. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I am the Scientific Review Officer. I have a couple of different SBIR study sections. I also am the coordinator for SBIR, STTR review at CSR. So I'm kind of the point person for any of the policy issues that CSR has to contribute and so on. So that's my background. If I can have the next slide, please. All right. At the Center for Scientific Review, we have one overarching goal, and that's to make sure that every grant application that comes in receives a fair, independent, expert, timely review, and make sure that any inappropriate influences are kept away from that review so that NIH can fund the most promising research. We work closely with program, obviously, and provide feedback for the review to them so that they can decide what the funding is. Within our particular area, which is SBIR review, we like to start with a reviewer overview and tell them, look, what we're trying to find is what is proposed in the application. Will it have a profound and sustained influence on a research field or the marketplace that they're addressing? Basically, it's Is it a great idea? Are these the right people to do it? Do they have a well thought out plan? And do they have the environment and the materials to take that plan to fruition? Next slide, please. Okay, when you put your applications together, one of the things that we look at is up front is, are there issues that can cause problems? And there are several that can arise. One, there are multiple registrations that you have to fill out in order to get your company into the system and able to submit. And if you miss any of those, you're going to hear about it from the system and they're going to kick you out. We also need to find out or let you know that the submission is really several stages. It comes into grants.gov, it goes to the Division of Receipt and Referral, it comes to CSR for review, and it goes to Program for Decisions on Funding, and then so on. So it's really multiple steps. And within each of those areas, there are multiple sub-steps as well. And we'll go through, at least in the review part, what it is that we do. One of the big things that we advise people is do not submit your application at the last minute, because invariably something is going to happen. And when it does, you have a very short window to make sure that everything gets fixed, that everything's addressed, and that you've actually uploaded the document that you wanted to upload. You would not believe the number of times we open up an application and we get people's resumes, we get notes to people, we get emails, we get all kinds of things that have no bearing at all on the application, but they get counted in the pages. The other problem is that there is a very short window, as I said, and if you receive a warning from the system and try and fix it after the deadline, it's not going to work. So make sure that you have a clean submission prior to the deadline, and I'll tell you what the deadlines are in just a minute. Make sure that you're using the correct application forms. Right now we're on forms E or F. Anyway, make sure you've got the right applications. NIH provides exhaustive documentation on how to submit an SBIR, STTR application. Please make sure that you check that and make sure that you're following those instructions. Do not overstuff. And by that we mean, we have the requirement that you use an 11-point serif font, and we will frequently get applications in there an 8-point, 9-point font. Basically what happens is that gives you an unfair advantage because you can stuff more information into those 6 or 12-page research plans than everyone else is doing. And so we try and have a level playing field. Everyone gets the same requirements, everyone gets the same review, and by overstuffing and putting things in places that they shouldn't be, that really is cheating. So one of the other pieces is that you really, if you're submitting a new application, it is a new dog. It is coming in fresh, and therefore you should not be citing previous reviews. You shouldn't be talking about previous scores, any types of outcomes or criticisms, and so on. So those are the top 5 or 10 problems that we see. Next slide, please. Okay. The process is pretty standard, and you can see it at the resources that are identified below. We have 3 due dates. Applications will come in. After the due date, there's a 2-day time period that you have to change it, to check it, and so on. Once that's done, it gets processed by grants.gov, sent over to the Division of Receipt and Referral. They take about a week or so, maybe 2, to make sure that it's clean, that the application is compliant, and they will send it to the IRGs. And we'll get into all this, but here's the time frame that you can see. So, you know, if you're planning, take these dates into account. Next slide, please. CSR has about 40 different SBIR, STTR study sections. Now, they're not all running at the same time. Some of them come in and out, but we have about 6,500 applications that we review per year. And CSR does roughly 90 to 95% of all of the SBIR applications that come into NIH. We do the review. The institutes have some specialty study sections that some of them go to, but by and large, it comes to us. Now, there are tools within CSR that will help you figure out which study section might best fit your application, and that's the CSR assignment referral tool. Now, keep in mind that not necessarily will your view of what your application is match what the actual study section is doing. DRR has done this for years. They have the latest descriptions of the study sections. They know what institutes will be funding particular science. And so they're the best group and will make the best assignment. Once an assignment is made, you can question it for a short period of time, but by and large, they're fairly spot on when they do this. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, once DRR is finished with an application and is sent to the study section, the review group, the scientific review officer, or SRO, who is assigned to that study section will take the time to read every application. They want to make sure that it fits the focus of the study section. They want to make sure that if there are any problems, they're caught early. Some of these things we just flag. Some of them are a cause for a major issue. We want to make sure that the scope and the focus of the project are appropriate for us. And we then look at what it is that the application is trying to do and identify the expertise we will need to evaluate it. Once we've done this and made sure that all of the applications are in the right place and they are appropriately set, we will send a notice to all of the applicants, letting them know that we have it and roughly when the review meeting will be and what to expect. After that, we start looking for people to fill the study section. And next slide. Okay. As you probably know, we have different types of panels at CSR. We have standing panels, which review R01 and R21 applications, and those have members that are long-serving and spend each review meeting with that group. SBIRs are run by SEPs, or special emphasis panels. And that means that every time we have a meeting, we have potentially a completely different roster. The rosters are put together based on the content of the applications as opposed to a general area of science. And so what we will do is start contacting people with the expertise that we need to review the proposals that we have in hand. So they may not be the same people from round to round. Just be aware of that. And in addition, when you go looking for reviewers, frequently they're going to be busy. So we may have a reviewer that attends a given meeting at one point, but won't be there for the next one. So, depending on what they've got going on in their lives. Next slide, please. When we look for people, what is it that we look for? We need people who have a broad view of the area of science they're working on. We need to make sure that they have demonstrated scientific and technical expertise, either through publications or through positions within their company. We also want to make sure that they are not out screaming from soapboxes about particular aspects of science, that they're impartial. They should have a doctoral or terminal degree or the equivalent. There are many cases where we have people that are not an MD, PhD, or even master's degree, but they have several years of significant experience carrying projects out to the marketplace. They should have a mature judgment, and as I said, they should have a really broad view of what the world is like. Our objective anytime we build a panel is we want people from academia so that we have access to the latest science. We also want people from small businesses and from the industry that actually will be using the tools that are being developed. So we will have people from pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies that are in the trenches doing things. We'll have people that are working in the small business to develop tools, technologies, and techniques. At least one of the things that we try and make sure is that we have at least 25% of the panel from business or other industry. This doesn't always happen, and frequently we can run into problems, but that's our goal. We also want to make sure that we have representation from women and minority scientists. We try and get as best as we can a geographic distribution so that we don't have everyone from California or Massachusetts being the reviewers. We also try to limit service on a particular panel so that we avoid excessive service. In general, that means we have people that will serve for about 12 review meetings over either a 4-year or 6-year period. One of the things that I will encourage as the point person is that if you're interested in seeing what this is like, and if you'd like to try out working on some of these panels, please send me your CV. Let me know that you're interested. We will put it into a centralized database that all of our SROs have access to, and they can search on expertise, they can search on your background and so on. So please feel free to contact me. Next slide, please. Okay. When we are working on making assignments, we have to figure out what it is that the particular application is doing and what expertise would be needed on that application. Now, SBIR, STTR applications, as you know, are pretty broad. So they will have a variety of different things, and we try to make sure that we have the science that's needed, the commercial that's, expertise or viewpoint that's needed, as well as a user. And we will do that when we're putting the assignments together. We generally have somewhere between 5 to 6 weeks after we have processed the applications and before the meeting that we will distribute applications to reviewers. Each application gets 3 reviewers. So there's a primary, secondary, and tertiary reviewer. We ask them that they prepare full critiques, and we'll get into what that is in just a minute. All 3 full critiques, but bear in mind that the requirement for the 3rd reviewer is that they give us an overall impact and scores only. That's their minimum level of input. Reviewers, before they even see your application, are going to be trained by the SRO on what the SBIR, STTR program is, what the review criteria are, and what they can and cannot say about things. And then we follow up with them as they're reviewing and as they submit their critiques to make sure that they follow those instructions. Next slide. Now, I saw one of the questions come through about conflicts of interest. This is probably the major job that an SRO has when they're putting together the panel. In addition to finding the right people, they've got to make sure that there are no conflicts. And there are a variety of ways we look at it. I mean, from the standpoint of identifying them quickly, we'll know if an institution is part of an application or if an institution is a competing area. You also have the ability to ask CSR to exclude certain people from review because you either have had problems with them in the past, there are ongoing legal actions, they're a direct competitor, and so on. We will try and honor those in every case. One of the problems that I frequently see, and I'm sure other SROs do too, is the blanket request for excluding reviewers. And so by the time you say, for example, I have a zebrafish application and I want no one in the area of zebrafish research looking at it because they'll steal my ideas, well, then we have a problem, because now how do we get someone that has a knowledge of the area to review the application? So when you request an exclusion, you should really tailor it to the 2 specific people. Okay, so personal, you know, you can read this fairly easily. Basically, it's if they are going to gain financially, if they're going to gain a position of power, or if they're going to gain some kind of respect within the community by either being a reviewer or being associated with the application, then that's a conflict. And that extends to not only the reviewer, but members of the family. In addition, we try to make sure that we don't have anyone that has a direct competition with the applicant's company. And when you submit an application 30 days before the review, you will see the roster. And if you see someone that is a problem in terms of your viewpoint, you notify the SRO and we'll take that into account. The other piece that we do is, of course, longstanding scientific disagreement, and that is generally brought forth by either the applicant or by the reviewer. And then there's the issue of personal bias. All of this not only is actual, but also appearance. If we have people that are on the panel that would have the appearance of a conflict, we're pretty conservative. We'll generally exclude them from reviewing that application. Next slide, please. Okay, a couple of examples. Financial interest, of course. or receiving $10,000 or more from an applicant who has got an application in, future intellectual property conflicts. And in this case, we see this frequently with the smaller companies that are working in a specific area. And then if an application comes in, let's say, for example, they're working on cardiovascular, hematology or something like that, and the application works in an area that they're working in, the reviewer can say, I don't want to see this application because there's a potential for intellectual property conflict down the road. And so we'll make sure that they don't have access to that. If we have an applicant that is on the panel, that person is out of the study section. So if you have an application coming in, you can't be a reviewer in the same area that will be reviewing your application. And then we have the issue of if a reviewer has served 4 times on the panel within the last 6 rounds, that's kind of excessive service, and we will try and keep that at a minimum. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've got the panel, and you're probably wondering, what is the group going to do? How are they going to look at it? And it was like I said, we want to see that the reviewers will want to see an application that has a great idea, that is going to make a sustained impact on the market, the research field, the people involved working in the field, something. And we have 5 core criteria that we use to evaluate that in addition to the overall impact. And that is, what is the significance of the project going to be to the marketplace or to the science that's involved? And do you establish that need with rigor of prior research? So that can be citing the literature and citing the problems that are brought up in that literature. It can be preliminary data that shows how it is that you're tackling this project and so on. Then there is the investigative team or investigator. Do they have the skills necessary to tackle the project that they've laid out for us? The question of innovation is basically, is this a 13th item that's been submitted, or is it something new? Is it some different way of doing things? And one of the things that we stress to SBIR panels is that this does not necessarily have to be brand new science. In many cases, when you're trying to bring things to market, what you're doing is taking known pieces and combining them in a unique way. So if you address a unique problem, then it's generally going to be considered innovative. Approach, that's your 6-page research plan or 12-page research plan if the phase 2 fast track, so on. And that you are going to lay out what you're planning to do, perils and pitfalls, how you're going to analyze things, what are your go, no-go decisions. Do you consider the various issues such as biological variables? Do you take into account all of the problems that potentially run into missing data, corrupt data? How do you integrate things? How do you approach things? And then finally, do you have the ability to bring resources to bear? So your environment. Do you have the equipment? Do you have the facilities? Can you get the chemicals? Can you get the cells, and et cetera? Next page. Okay. So we have the core criteria. Then there are the additional review criteria that can impact either significance, overall impact, or approach. And those are, in a phase 1, is this really something that is going to go on and become a product? Can you see the gleam in the application's eye, if you will, that there is a commercial potential here? Now, this does not ask for a commercialization plan, which is in phase 2, direct phase 2, and fast track applications. It is merely a statement of here's how what we're doing fits into a particular niche area or a particular area. This is what we're trying to accomplish. So a couple of sentences, a paragraph at most in a phase 1 application. Then there are milestones that are put in place, and they have to be measurable, meaningful, quantifiable. And that's true for all applications. In other words, tell us how you're going to judge that you've made it to where you said you wanted to go. And if our panel looks at it and says, yes, good milestones, definite decision points, then that's evaluated very positively. And then there are issues of human subjects, if you have them, vertebrate animals and biohazards and how you handle those. There are tons of literature points and documentation available that will explain what those are and what need to be considered. We can go into that at some other time. Next slide, please. Okay, types of applications. When we have phase one applications, all right, first, let me back up a little bit. When we set up the meeting, we divide the applications into phase one, so that's one cluster, and phase two, fast track, and direct phase two. That's a second cluster, because the review criteria for those two clusters are totally different, and we want to keep eggs in the correct baskets. So with a phase one application, which are the R41s and R43s. R41s are STTRs, R43s are SBIRs. What we're looking at is the fact that you're not required to submit preliminary data. The purpose of the project is to establish feasibility, and we need a rigorous experimental plan. Now, if you provide preliminary data, that's open to a discussion, interpretation, and evaluation. Commercialization, commercial potential, as I've said, is part of the significance, milestones, and so on. R41s, STTRs, there's a requirement that you have a nonprofit research institution, and there's the pieces. R43, you can use up to 30% of your budget for consultants and contractors. Next slide, please. Okay, for phase twos, and those are the two R42s and two R44s, they are built on top of a successful phase one. So you've already done the phase one research, you've reached your milestones, you're going to explain very briefly in the phase two how you did that and the quality. You need the data from that phase one work to apply for a phase two. And here we're now talking about commercial potential. You have to have a commercialization plan, and that's a 12-page document that explains a whole bunch of things that we'll go into in just a minute. Once again, percentages, you can see them here. I don't need to read them. Next slide, please. Okay, for fast tracks, that is a mechanism that it was put in place to help companies avoid the gap between the phase one submission review and a phase two submission and evaluation. So the idea is that you can put them both together. They have to be distinct, separate projects with distinct separate budgets. The phase one portion is a standalone project. It's got clear milestones for success that have to be achieved before instituting phase two. While preliminary data is not expected or not required, it is expected, and you do have to have a commercialization plan. What happens is that the panel will review the entire application, we'll send it to program. Program then looks at it and says, okay, here's the phase one if it's awarded. At the end of phase one, you tell program how you accomplished your goals, and they will make the decision of whether to go ahead and fund the phase two or not. There's no additional review. So that's how it avoids the gap. Next slide, please. Okay, direct phase two is your chance that you've done a little work on your own. You think you've got a fairly good idea. You have preliminary data or interest. You can skip the phase one and go direct to a phase two application. So you've already done the research. You tell us what the milestones are. The panel evaluates those. Preliminary data is required because you have done that work. Also, the commercialization plan is required. This application is reviewed just like a phase two. So they will look at the 12-page research plan, look at the 12-page commercialization plan, the bio sketches, and so on, and decide based on that. Next slide, please. For commercialization, we've been talking about this. Basically, there are the 7 points you see here. What's the value of the product? How is it going to benefit the community around? What is the company? What's your history? Do you have the right people in it? Have you identified who your marketplace is, who your customer is? Can you tell us about competitors? What is it that you offer that they don't have? Tell us how you're protecting your invention. What is it that you have to take care of your intellectual property? And then if you have any kinds of commitments for funding or follow-on funding, if you have commitments from people to purchase your product, how do those factor into a finance plan? And then you're of course going to go into how you're going to produce the widgets you're producing, and then what you expect in terms of revenue stream, distributors, how you're going to run your business. So those are all the things that reviewers look for when they evaluate commercialization. Next slide, please. The reviewers, like I said, have been trained. They need to know what is it that you're doing? Where is the need? Why is there a need for the product that you're describing? How significant is this going to be to the marketplace that you're going after? Is it the first? Is it the second? Is it the third? But it really has an improvement over everything else that's there. If you have worked in the field for a while, how successful have you been in introducing things that change concepts and so on? Does the product have the potential to become a marketable product? And one of the things that we instruct here is that all of these projects are generally long time frame. So when you're evaluating the application, the commercial potential that you're looking at is at the moment with a vision for what's down the road, because there is no way in 12 pages that you can put every possibility, but you need to present in the framework, or the panel will look for, have you presented within the framework of where you are now, what it is you need to take the next step forward. Next slide, please. Frequently, a reviewer, first, reviewers by and large are very reticent to make really harsh comments. So if they see that there is no significance in the project, that it's describing something, some minor interest, or really the application hasn't made a convincing case, you'll see a comments within either significance, within approach, within innovation, within the overall impact that says, I don't see what you're doing here. And so that's what the issue is. Have you done an adequate job of looking at the scientific literature? One of the things that we frequently hear from reviewers is, well, there is a whole body of literature that addresses a lot of what these people are doing, so I'm not sure what it is they bring to the table. You should bring that out when you put your submission in, before you send it in. Establish a firm floor for what you're up to. Which also goes to lack of knowledge of relevant work. Experimental approach. Do you have scientific rationale put together? Do you have rigor of research? Do you have well-reasoned argument for why you're doing what you're doing? Have you looked at the possibility of other outcomes and how do you deal with them? Do you have expertise in all of the methodology, or does someone on your panel have expertise? One of the things that will hit frequently is the lack of rigor, especially statistical rigor in analyzing data. Finally, the other piece that we will hear frequently is, well, they've got a really good idea here and so on, but this is a 6-month project and it's really overly ambitious given they've got 32 aims. So make sure that the amount of work that you're putting together matches the people that you have and the time frame that you're working in. Next slide, please. Okay, at the meeting, and you're going to see what happens, we will send the critiques out, the assignments out. We get the critiques and overall impact scores uploaded. We check for missing information, for errors, for mismatched comments, for violations of all kinds of things. And then within the clusters that I talked about originally, phase 1 and phase 2, we will rank order the average of the 3 overall impact scores and select the top 50% within each of those 2 clusters to be discussed at a meeting. So when you see, some of you have seen, I'm sure, your summary statements come back and you see the score of ND, which means not discussed. That means that it fell below the 50%, the initial 50% of the scoring within that group of applications. Once we have those 50%, we randomize for the discussion. So we don't start with the best scoring application and work to the worst. We start randomly. And so that's how we will approach it within the study section meeting. Next slide, please. I need to pick this up. We have available on our resources section a poster of what peer review does. So this is really an overview of how the process works. You can go ahead and download it from the URL that's sitting there. Next slide, please. We also have lots of information on review policy, on review resources, on how things are done, including some of the example applications and example critiques that are available, and you can download those as well. Head to the SBIR.gov website. And I think that's it. Yes. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. That's the framework. And now we are going to have a bunch of the folks from NIH offer to show you what a study section would look like. Now, this is a mock section. So the applications are smashed together from a variety of them. We will have the people representing the SRO, the chair, the reviewers. These are folks that work at NIH. They have sat through multiple review sessions. So we're pulling bits and pieces over what's going on. So we have a question on timing. Okay, usually I'll answer that one really quickly. When we get the applications in, like I said, we have 4 to 6 weeks to provide those to the reviewers and for them to give us information back. Once the study section is held, CSR is required to have the critiques released to program and to the applicants 30 days after the meeting. So that's the deadline at the end. Frequently we get them out sooner, but we have 30 days. For scores, we try and get those out 2 to 3 days after the review meeting. So that's working days as well. So you should know 2 to 3 days after the meeting what your score is, and then within 30 days you should get a notification from Commons that your summary statement is ready for viewing. Okay, shall we bring everyone back?
Yes, please. Thank you. And I just wanted to, while we get ready to transition into the mock peer review, we see a nice steady flow of questions. Feel free to please send your questions in. We are tracking all of them and will respond to them during the Q&A. Please also fill out that feedback form as well as connect with us on LinkedIn. Take care, and I hope you enjoy the show. So each reviewer is going to introduce themselves and their roles. So Kurt Alec, can we start with you? While Kurt works on his audio, Tanya, do you want to begin?
Thanks. So I think how we're going to do this is, and this is similar to something we've done previously. So how are we going to do this? I'm going to turn this over to our SRO and our chair for this study section. And as noted in the disclaimer, while we do like to have fun with this, the hope is that this is a great learning exercise on how a review is structured and how things operate. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the chair and the SRO, and you guys can get us started and kick us off.
Okay, let's start. Generally what will happen is that we'll all get together with our coffee in the seminar room. We've been doing it by Zoom for the last several months, so it's still the same type of organization. And what will happen is that the SRO will start the meeting, and we will do it as follows. This meeting is closed to the general public in accordance with provisions of the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA. Only those reviewers and NIH staff having relevant official business will be present. Now, we each have a role to play in the review of these applications. I'm the designated federal official for this meeting and will monitor the process to make sure that each application receives an objective and fair initial peer review and that all of our applicable laws, rules, regulations, and policies are followed. And in order for me to fulfill this role, all of the business for this meeting must be conducted in my presence. So when we have hotel meetings, that means you don't get to talk about the applications you just reviewed outside the room. Any comments have to be done in my presence. Now, the chair is going to guide the scientific discussion for this review, and they will let you know what they expect. You, as reviewers, are serving as ad hoc advisors to the federal government, and we really appreciate your service. Now, please be aware that you have agreed to serve under the rules and regulations set forth in FACA. So, one of the cornerstones of our review process is confidentiality. Everything that we discuss, all of the paperwork, all the materials, all the conversations, all the deliberations and assignments related to this meeting are confidential. They must be kept confidential, and therefore, if anyone asks you about this meeting, and that's applicants, that's your colleagues, that's other individuals, any questions, please tell them that you're not at liberty to discuss it, and then refer it to me and refer them to me. We will handle any questions and comments. We take this very seriously. Consequences for breaches in confidentiality and review integrity may include removing reviewers from study sections, barring reviewers from receiving federal funding, and in some cases referring the case to investigation and possible legal prosecution. So this is serious, please take it so. Conflict of interest, we have sent several emails to you defining what a conflict of interest is. You've signed off on several forms stating that at that stage of the review, you have seen no conflicts. We will take care of anything that pop up during the meeting with the post-meeting review conflict form. So if during the discussion you hear something and you go, oh, I know him, and oh, I think I shouldn't be here, let me know, let the ESA that's working in the meeting know, and we'll put you in conflict and remove you from the discussion. And finally, scientific misconduct. If during the discussion you feel that there has been a fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism in the work that's being proposed, please let me know. Do not talk about it to the panel, because after all, an accusation is not a proven thing until it's gone through the entire process. We will go ahead and review the application. We will refer the issue to the Office of Research Integrity, and they will investigate it. So it will be out of our hands. So, and with that, I will turn it over to our chair and take on my SRO role.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. So what we do at this point in time, hopefully I have started my video, is I, as the chair, will lead a introduction that goes around the table. Since we don't have a table, I will introduce myself, and then I will call on the other reviewers to introduce themselves, and basically they'll just say a little bit about what their background is and why they're there. After we do that and introduce any observers in the room, then we will start discussion of the applications. So first, I am the chairperson. I am Dr. Dana Scully. I am the Chief Scientific Officer of Microimplants, LLC. We design and manufacture custom microimplants for domestic customers, international customers, and beyond. Okay, so our next person is Dr. Kurt Alec. Would you introduce yourself?
Hello, this is Dr. Kurt Alec. I am a double endowed professor at 3 esteemed research institutions, and thus I have a lot of expertise to impart on everything relating to this review panel. So any questions you have, I will be able to answer them and can tell you which applications are good.
Thank you, Dr. Alec. Our next reviewer is Mr. H. Equity. Mr. Equity, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is H. Equity, and I am the owner of a small company called eTech Interplanetary Health. It's my pleasure to be here. I have several grants from NIMHD as well as other institutes dealing with SBIR and STTR. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Equity. The next reviewer would be Dr. Julia Ogden.
Hello, my name is Dr. Julia Ogden. I'm an accomplished pathologist at the Toronto Mercy Hospital. I also do some collaborative work with my husband, the famous Detective Murdoch, on some inventions that are very mysterious and for proprietary reasons I will not discuss.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ogden. Our next reviewer is Dr. Carmen Sandiego.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Carmen Sandiego. I am professor at Acme University of the Sciences.
Okay. And last but not least is Dr. Tanya Stark.
Hi, my name is Dr. Tanya Stark. I'm the CEO and president of Stark Industries, LLC. We had, the company used to work predominantly in the defense industry, but has now moved more towards healthcare and healthcare robotics. And so I'll be able to talk a lot about the robotics and different new technologies and innovative technologies in the healthcare system. I have to ask, Carmen Sandiego, where are you?
I am in Croatia today. I'm in Dubrovnik.
Very nice. All right. Then once we've introduced the reviewers, we also go around the room and introduce any observers who are present at the meeting. It's very common for our observers to be program officers who have an interest in applications that are going to be reviewed at that meeting, and they are strictly observers. They listen and they learn. I believe we have one program officer today, Dr. Love.
Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Dr. Grant Love, and I'm a program officer at the Technology Institute at the National Institute of Health. And my portfolio includes small business grants, either through small business or through university. That's the technology grants. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we're ready to get started with our discussions. Our first application is going to be a new phase 1 SBIR application, also as a clinical trial. Before we start, we're going to collect some preliminary scores from the 3 assigned reviewers. So our 3 assigned reviewers are Mr. Equity, Mr. Alec, and Dr. Alec, excuse me, and Dr. Ogden. So Mr. Equity, can you give me your preliminary score, please?
A 4.
A 4, okay. Dr. Alec, what is your preliminary score?
7.
Ooh, okay, 7. And Dr. Ogden, what is your preliminary score?
A 4.
A 4, okay, fine. All right, so to get started, Dr. Equity, Mr. Equity, you can go first. What we'd like you to do is just very briefly describe the application, what's it about, and then please let us know what are the score driving points that led to your score, including things like scientific rigor, the milestones, and the commercialization potential, since this is a phase 1. Please go ahead, Mr. Equity.
Thank you. People get me mixed up all the time with those doctors, and especially those that have double endowed professorships. But I don't have one of those degrees. I'm just a businessman, and I like to start companies and make them successful. So Mr. is my preferred title. Thank you. This first time submission, which I like very much, is from a small company in South Carolina, and it proposes a novel telehealth computer tablet assisted intervention called Partners at Meals. If successful, this ambitious cluster randomized trial intervention will result in the following. The primary outcome is a demonstrated improvement in nutritional status and dysfunctional behaviors and quality of life for participants with dementia. The secondary outcomes, but they're really too many to mention, well, let me just go to the score drivers for this. My score drivers: great team of interventionists and researchers with experience in the care of individuals with dementia and in designing effective interventions. Conceptually, I love the multi-level perspective. They make a strong case for the need for this product, supported by a strong literature review and logical and scientifically compelling narratives. One important aspect of this intervention is that the meals will be consumed at either enhanced usual care sites or the participant's home. this is a novel aspect. Feeding individuals at their home, especially for individuals with dementia, will minimize their upsetness in terms of traveling to a new place. Let me now share my concerns that drove my score towards not so good, the higher levels. This team has little experience in developing marketable technologies. They have great ambition. In fact, it is too much, as reflected in the long list of secondary outcomes. Consequently, some of the components are underdeveloped and include a lack of details regarding the trial design, participant dyads and population attributes, site selection including inclusion and exclusion criteria, racial and ethnic and SES population attributes, and the use of the computer tablets and details around the train-the-trainer components. I'll stop here now to give my esteemed colleagues a chance to respond.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Equity. Our second reviewer had slightly different opinion, and that would be Dr. Alec. Why don't you tell us what you think about this application, focusing more on a brief concurrence with the primary reviewer, but also letting us know additional points or points where you have a difference of opinion.
Sure. So Mr. Equity did a great job of talking about the strengths of the application, or at least he saw them as strengths, you know, in terms of a strong team and great goals. I think where I differed on this application is how likely and, you know, how much do we believe that they're actually going to be able to achieve such goals. So, you know, getting a little bit more specific there. The first thing I noticed is, you know, they say that they're going to demonstrate all these improvements. I did not see any preliminary data that suggests that they will.
Pardon me, Dr. Alec, it's a phase 1. They don't require preliminary data. They can make their case in another way.
Well, I didn't see enough of a likelihood of, and many of these other applications have preliminary data that tells me it's likely to succeed.
No, really, they can make their case based on a thorough literature review or other factors. It does not have to be preliminary data.
Okay.
And
well,
let me jump in here too.
Yes,
also,
thank you.
Try not to compare applications. We want to look at each application as a standalone entity.
Thank you.
Excellent point, Dr. Marshall.
Okay, well, that'll be said. Let's jump to the next issue here. So they talk about how they're going to have these 2 trials with 60 patients each. It's unclear if that's enough for statistical power, and is this a really powered study, and it's all going to be in one state, and how much can you extrapolate that? Because, I mean, I assume they're going to develop this for more than one state. So that was a concern. And then they also talk about, as Mr. Equity said, that they are going to demonstrate improvement in nutritional status and dysfunctional behaviors. But how are they assaying that? What experiments are they actually doing to demonstrate such improvement? I did not see that in the application, and that is critical. I'll stop there, and I can bring up more weaknesses if the other reviewers would like.
Well, why don't we let our third reviewer, Dr. Julia Ogden, weigh in? Again, just, you know, talking briefly about how you agree, but also bringing out any points where you disagree.
Okay, sure. So overall, I pretty much agree with my esteemed colleagues on both the negative and the positive critiques. I would like to add, though, the biggest critique that hasn't been mentioned yet is the difficulty I had, at least, in reading the application. There was poor grantsmanship because of this difficulty to read. The figures were very small font. The labels were difficult to read, and it looked like even they were mislabeled in some of the figures. So that was why my score was a 4, but I could even go even worse because of this poor grantsmanship.
Okay, all right. So we have some additional things to talk about since this is a clinical trial. What about their study timelines? Any of our assigned reviewers want to weigh in on that?
I didn't have any problems with their study timelines. I thought they were reasonable. I think they may have some challenges facing them in terms of actually being able to get into people's houses. You know,
Okay.
unfortunately, we're in the midst of COVID-19, and so getting into people's houses isn't so easy. And it also comes with its own threat to the health of the people that will be actually going in to provide the respite care.
Of course,
So I think
Equity,
that's my
yes,
only
okay,
concern.
I think our chair is going to address this point.
Mr.
Dr.
Equity,
Marshall? Yeah.
one of the things that we recently released guidance on was the impact of COVID on research. And it was stated that when reviewing applications or when submitting, assume that the impact of COVID will be taken care of before the application is actually executed. So if that has affected your score, you need to rethink it.
Or at least rethink
Thank
that
you.
part of
I
it.
just love NIH for being concerned about that. And it's not going to be a problem. I'll easily revise my score to take that consideration out. Thank you.
Okay, great. I have one more question before we open the discussion. Obviously, this is a clinical trial. What about human subjects protection and inclusion of women, minorities, and individuals across the lifespan? How is that addressed in this application? Any assigned
I can
reviewer?
speak to that as well.
Okay, surely.
One of the issues that I did note in terms of my poor score driving points was that they did not pay much attention to addressing and providing details around the populations that will be included. This
Okay.
includes not only race, ethnicity, but also SES. They'll be working both in rural populations as well as in rural areas as well as in urban areas. And I thought more attention to detail in terms of the differences they might expect and how it might influence their protocols was warranted.
Okay. Okay. Understood.
I can add in that, you know, I thought the populations, I mean, as Mr. Equity said, there may be some things missing there, but if you then just look at the overall population, it wasn't clear to me that we're actually going to know that this definitely works, and this is an SBIR. Should we not know that at the end of the study?
So you're saying that the number of participants is too low?
Well, I mean, what are we supposed to know at the end of an SBIR? Are we supposed to know for sure that it works, or is it just supposed to be, you know, proof of concept?
Well, this is a phase 1. It is a phase 1. They don't have to take it to the market at the end of the phase 1. It can be proof of concept.
Okay, so even if they don't have statistical power and it's just, you know, showing that there's a trend and that this could lay the stage for future studies, that is the expectation for phase 1?
It could be.
Okay, that helps.
Okay, fantastic.
That's
Great.
the expectation I had out of this one.
Okay, good to know, Mr. Equity.
Thank you.
Okay, we can open the discussion to the unassigned panelists. Would anyone like to contribute some thoughts or ask some questions?
Question. Is now when we talk about the budget, I had some budgetary concerns.
Not yet. We talk about the science first, then score, and then we talk about non-scored issues like the budget. We'll get to that in a minute.
Well, what about, I did have some questions around the time that the PI is going to be spending on this project. I noticed they just don't have a lot of, you know, their level of effort here is very low. Is that something we can talk about now?
No, let's talk about that when we get to the budget.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Any other scientific parts of the discussion? Okay. Well, then let me try to briefly summarize where I think we are before we offer some suggested final scores. There were some definite strengths to this project. It was a great team. They have experience. They have a novel idea of how to deliver these meals at home. These were balanced to some extent by some concerns about the fact that the plan was a little bit sketchy in terms of its detail, perhaps even overly ambitious. There was some concerns initially about statistical power, but at the end, I believe you agreed that they had enough participants in the study to make a phase 1 equivalent initial proof of concept. Does that capture the science? Great. All righty. So then why don't we revisit the scores? What score would you suggest as a final overall preliminary, overall score, Mr. Equity?
Based on some of the comments my colleagues made, I'm going to move from 4 to 5.
Okay, a score of 5. Then we have Dr. Alec. Where are you?
Yeah, so, in deference to some of my colleagues, even though, yes, one of them does not have a advanced degree,
which is not necessary.
Okay, well, anyway.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, I will come to a 6 for my 7.
You're a 6. Okay, and then finally, Dr. Ogden, what score do you recommend?
Well, after this very fruitful discussion, I think I will also change my score to a 6.
To a 6. All right, so we have a preliminary score, a final score suggested range from 5 to 6. Does anyone plan to vote outside that range? Okay, great. Then mark your score sheets electronically, and then we'll go on to the next part of the discussion. So at this point in time, we can talk about the budget. Would somebody like to tell me what you think of the budget?
Yeah, I mean, I had a concern about the budget that I had mentioned earlier. I have some concerns that really that about the amount of time that the PI, and the percentage and level of effort the PI is going to be spending on the grant. I thought it was very low. And I also noticed that the overall budget is over the small business, the budgetary, caps that are for SBIRs and STTRs. I mean, it just seemed like it was over what you're allowed to ask for.
Well, that would be a programmatic issue after the review is done. So I
Okay.
report your concern.
Well, actually, could I ask a question about that?
Okay.
Aren't they allowed to exceed the statutory caps if they are addressing a waiver or one of the waiver topics?
Right, it is entirely up to program whether they can exceed the cap, which is why we don't make this a review issue. It's up to them making their decision.
Is that the guy making all the faces? Can he tell us, what he thinks? He's the program person, right?
Well,
but wait just a minute. Wait just a minute, please. They included in their application a justification for meeting the budget cap and then for exceeding it based on the fact that there was a waiver. It fell under one of the waiver topics. And they really laid this out very clearly. So
and that will be very helpful to program staff when they're looking at the summary statement and making decisions about funding. Okay, fantastic. I think we are done. Dr. Marshall, did I leave anything out?
No, you covered it. Perfect.
Then we're ready to move on to the next application. So this application is a phase 2 and a resubmission. It is a application. We have 3 assigned reviewers. The primary reviewer is Tanya Stark. The secondary is Carmen Sandiego. And the third reviewer is Julia Ogden. So starting with Dr. Stark, can you give me your preliminary score?
2.
All right. And Dr. Sandiego?
A 6.
A 6. Okay. And then finally, Dr. Ogden, what is your preliminary enthusiasm?
A 1.
A 1. Oh, we've got some interesting spread here. Well then, Dr. Stark, why don't you tell me what's so great about this application?
Great. So this is a phase 2 resubmission from ArtDec to continue development of their new pill stream system. So as you all know, medical errors can cause significant harm to residents of long-term care facilities, and a use of unit dose medications takes staff time and have high error rates. In addition, there are costs associated with waste when prescriptions change or patients leave the facilities. So while Medicare and Medicaid are requiring shorter cycles to reduce waste, this also has the unfortunate consequence of potentially increasing staff time and potential errors. So the PillStream system will incorporate the TileJet robot to provide high accuracy, high throughput production of custom multi-medication packages. And the hope is that this will allow central fill pharmacies to provide long-term care facilities with short cycle dispensing at reduced cost, and allow them to return unused medications because they have a closed loop capability. So this is a resubmission in the phase 1 of a phase 2. So in the phase 1, they created this prototype. It exceeded their primary success criterion with regards to accuracy, as well as exceeding the target fill rate by 50%. And in this phase 2, they're proposing to build and test a larger, fully functional PillStream prototype that is able to dispense directly from wholesale medication bottles. They're going to modify the onboard software to enable integration with the pharmacy management software that already exists. And then they're going to do a beta test in up to 2 central fill pharmacies. So I really think that this group addressed the reviewer concerns. I reviewed it previously, and I think they really did address those concerns. And that includes the modification, that second aim, adding that second aim in about modification of the software for better integration with the pharmacy management software. That was a concern that we had. So I really like that. I think they met the milestones. They well met the milestones and exceeded them from the phase 1. And they really have a solid approach and kind of clear success criteria and clear rigor. I really think it's a solid proposal now. I still wish that they did more than 2 pharmacies in their beta test, but I recognize that that's within the boundaries of this phase 2 and within what they're going to do. That I think it's reasonable. I can want more, but I understand that this is what they're able to do, and they kind of explained that really well, I thought, in their response. They gave a really solid response to review, and so that's why I have it as a 2.
Dr. Starr, can I jump in here for just a minute to point out
Sure.
that it really is a breach of your own confidentiality to say that you reviewed the previous application. So going forward, let's not get into that. So these are new dogs, they came in new, and we're all fresh.
Good point, Dr. Marshall, good point. Okay, why don't we go on to our second reviewer, who is Dr. San Diego. Where are you, Dr. San Diego?
Oh, I'm in Monument Valley now, so
okay.
Yeah. Well, I have looked at the application, reviewed it carefully, and I guess my score is based on a couple of important things that I noted in the application. One was that the commercial development plan to me was overly optimistic. The market size and some of the other data that they included, just showed some overwhelming optimism on the part of the applicant. I'm going to also, I was a bit concerned about a national caregivers meeting that was that happened about 5 months ago, where they failed to note in their application some other technologies that actually may impact what they are doing in the application. So that was a national meeting that was open to all, and papers and abstracts that were available to the public to view prior to the meeting, that seemed to have they've missed that very important data that could have, I believe, impacted some of the information that they included in the application. And I'll add that my very dear professor friend, Professor Malmstrom, has working on something that's really similar
Wait,
to this.
hang on a second, Dr.
Oh,
San Diego. Is
what?
this public information or private information? Because
No,
it's public information.
I agree. The national meeting public, but the conversation with my friend Professor Malmstrom is not public. So
why don't we set that aside for
okay,
now?
all right. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So those are the reasons why I have given this application the score that I did.
Okay. Then we have, last but not least, Dr. Ogden.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree with the negative critiques. I was very excited about this application. I think they more than adequately addressed the concerns in the resubmission. I think that the way their approach was scientifically rigorous, and I think that this should be funded.
Oh, well, we don't make funding decisions. We can recommend it based on the science, but funding decisions are the purview of program.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anything else, Dr. Ogden?
That's it. I was very excited about this application.
Okay. And I do believe there could be a clinical trial in this, a small one, a beta trial. Is that correct?
There is, yep.
And did they articulate their study timelines adequately for the trial?
Yeah, I thought the approach was really well done. I think they really addressed all of the clinical trials issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then human subjects protections and also inclusion, women, minorities, and individuals
really solid.
Lifespan,
well,
all of that solid. Okay. Fantastic.
Well described. They followed the instructions.
Good for them. Glad to hear that. Okay, well then before we conclude the discussion, why don't we open the discussion to the floor? Would any of the other reviewers like to contribute at this point?
I just want to, comment on Carmen's, Dr. San Diego's comments about, I agree about the public meeting, and that maybe is something to consider, although obviously that happened after this application. But I think even with that information, and I also happen to look at that information since it is public information, I felt that this is still extremely relevant, and I just beg to disagree there. I really do think this is still a solid proposal and really, has good significance and is a positive one. I factored that in, and that's why it's a 2 and not, an outstanding 1. But I still think there's, it's a solid effort here.
Okay. Any other comments before I try to summarize the discussion? Okay.
Wait just a minute.
Yes.
Is
Mr. Equity.
solid good enough for a score of a 2? I mean, isn't a 2 supposed to be much better than solid?
Well, for me, I mean, that is as good as you're going to get for me. I tend to 2 is.
You can use the whole range, Dr. Stark. From 1.
Yeah, but I hate to do that, and I'm generally very negative about everything. So the fact that I've gotten to the point where I think it's a 2. I mean, that's for those who have reviewed with me before. This is pretty much as good as it gets.
Okay. Any other discussion?
H Equity here.
Yes, Mr. Equity.
I like this application.
Okay, excellent.
And the strength of its phase 1 prototype. I thought they did a really good job.
Mm-hmm.
My only concern is that the beta test is limited to 2 central fill pharmacies. I think Dr. Stark mentioned this.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that they will not be able to test the robustness of their software regarding its integration with pharmacy management software. Did they discuss whether the 2 beta testers would utilize the same software systems or compatible software systems?
They did actually, and that was one of the, so that is, I completely agree with your thoughts there. They did address that. They are using different software systems. So they're really trying to test it out in as, kind of these different environments, recognizing again, there's only 2 of them. So I think they picked the best 2 I thought they could, given the limitations in, again, you know, you can only do so much in this phase 2. And the point of this is really to get to some kind of inflection point, either a partner or an investor. So, I mean, it's not supposed to take it all the way.
I will say that one positive I found here is that in the commercialization plan, they talk about that even though they may have limited experience bringing products to market, they talk about the board of advisors, the scientific advisory board, you know, and these consultants and COOs that they bring in, CMOs, you know, that really do have a lot of expertise in bringing products to market. So, you know, even though maybe these two have not done it over and over again, they are bringing in people that can do that for them. Who knows? Maybe they'll even bring in Mr. Equity. Maybe he could do something here.
I'm sorry, but I wasn't even finished with my comments.
Oh.
So
Mr.
if
Equity,
you will
please.
allow me to kind of get back to where I was. So I was asking some questions about their software systems. Now I want to just pivot a little bit. Did they discuss the range of accuracy that they were expecting between these two central fill pharmacies? I mean, in terms of 0.00x%?
Yes,
did
they
mention
did.
that at all?
Yes, they did. They did it. They're looking for 99.99%.
But how about the range? I mean, do they expect both of them just to hit it at 99.99?
They don't. I mean, they are being reasonable, and they did discuss. I'm kind of scrolling through the application here, but I remember that they did kind of talk about there was a range within several fractions of a percentage point that they anticipated. And again, I do think it's reasonable. I mean, and they did talk about a throughput that was about 100 blisters per minute. You know, I mean, I think, again, what they kind of provided as their goals seemed reasonable to me, given the situation at hand.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'll now turn the floor back over to our esteemed professor.
Okay. Any other comments, or shall I try to summarize this discussion? Okay, I'll give it a shot. It looks like the phase 1 was very successful. They met their milestones. They have a logical plan for next step in this phase 2. It is a resubmission. They did a good job of addressing the concerns of the previous reviewers and even exceeding expectations. Generally, it looks like this is a really great idea with market potential. There was some concern that the commercialization plan was overly optimistic about this. However, it looks like they have a very solid group of advisors with commercialization expertise in place to guide them through this process. It looks like the human subjects in clinical trials are adequately taken care of, no problem there. Did I miss anything? Okie dokie. Well, then why don't we go back to our assigned reviewers and see what you recommend as a final score. So, Dr. Stark, what are you thinking now?
I'm staying at a 2.
Okay, that's a tough love 2 from you then, I guess, huh? Okay, Dr. San Diego, what is your thought now for a final score?
Well, after listening to my colleagues and taking into consideration that even though the commercial development plan, in my opinion, was not stellar in terms of how they had worked out their market size and everything, they do have a good board of scientific directors involved, and I do feel like that's going to help the company. And also understanding that I cannot include knowing information that is not public. I'm going to my score will go from a 6 to a 4.
To a 4. Okay. And then finally, Dr. Ogden, where do you land on a suggested final score?
I'm sticking to an enthusiastic 1.
Okie doke. So that makes us have a relatively robust range of scores from 1 to 4. Does anyone plan to vote outside that range?
Yeah, I'm thinking about voting a 5.
Really? Well, refresh my memory. Why is that? What is your 5 for?
Well, I'm a little concerned about them only using these two pharmacies.
Ah, the two pharmacies.
And that's a concern for me.
Okay.
Now, do I have to explain why I'm going outside the range?
Well, you do, and but frankly, you did mention it during the discussion, and if I had recalled that, I would not have made you explain again, but I did it, so thank you very much for explaining. Okie doke.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so everyone, mark your score sheet, and then we'll talk about non-scorable issues, such as the budget. Would somebody like to tell me what you think of the budget?
I thought the budget was reasonable. Yeah,
I agree.
fine.
I agree. Mhm.
Okay. So any problems with things like resource sharing or authentication? Is that okay?
No.
Okay. Okay, well then that concludes the discussion of the second application. So since we only have two applications in this meeting, I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Marshall.
All right, thank you very much. Great job, everyone. I think you've hit all of the topics, and I noticed that a couple of people had COIs that were taken care of. So if you have any issues with the discussions that we've had, please note them on your post-meeting forms, e-sign that. You have 3 days to update any of the critiques that you have made changes to. So please, please, if you've changed your score, the critiques should reflect your new score, not what was there now. Please update those. It gets to be problematic trying to explain scores that are way out of line with the comments that are made. So please take care of those. And with that, we will close the meeting.
Okay, great. So we're done. Thank you very much. On to the Q&A.
Thank you, everyone, for all of your comments and feedback. We did have some questions about whether this is a real session. This is a mock review based on some realistic scenarios. However, this is mock, so we hope that you've enjoyed the opportunity to see what a review process is like. We have received many questions, so we will just quickly touch on a few application resources. I'm going to ask Dr. Todd Haim if you want to add anything here, and then we'll move over to the Q&A.
No, yeah, all of these are linkable, and you'll get this, you know, as was said, by Thursday. And there are several of the resources available and coming, so you know, a lot more to come. And also, if I could say, I mean, you know, this was a little different if you've attended any of our webinars before, and that we had this mock session, not just presentations. These webinars are really obviously designed for your benefit as past and potential applicants to the programs at NIH. So those feedback forms that, you know, are being linked here and being sent out in the chat, those are absolutely critical for us to know that if we're actually serving you and if we should keep doing these webinars and how we should be doing these webinars. So please just take a couple of minutes today while it's fresh, you know, during the Q&A to fill those out. And I know we have a lot of questions, so we will be able to go until 2:30 if there are, you know, a lot of questions. So we will be able to go a little longer to address some of the questions that were sent.
Thank you, Todd. And on your screen, you will see some contact information if you have any specific questions you'd like to follow up with folks on. We have received well over 50 questions, so please be patient. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And we may have to condense like questions. Again, as Todd mentioned, please do fill out the feedback form as you are listening to these Q&As. So I'm going to start off with a couple of questions that relate to conflict of interest. What if a reviewer is chosen from academia and is connected with a company developing a similar technology to the one he's reviewing? Do you ensure that they would recuse themselves? That question, I'm going to kick that to you, Dr. Richon.
In general, the SRO is familiar with the area, so they may flag that on their own. The other possibility is that the applicant can identify the people that might be in direct conflict. And then finally, the reviewer themselves. By and large, the folks that we get from academia are very concerned about confidentiality and conflict of interest, and they will flag things that are even not conflicts to us according to policy. So they're very conservative about flagging things.
Thank you. And if there's a conflict of interest comes up during the review panel, are applicants notified?
No, because that would compromise confidentiality of the review process. So what we do is the reviewer or the panel member who would be in conflict notifies us. They are removed from the room. They don't score the application, and they don't participate in the discussion.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a couple questions about perceived bias. So during the mock panel, Dr. Stark stated that she will never give a rating of 1 and that 2 is the best any application can get from her. How does the committee deal with that kind of personal bias?
Everyone is in stunned silence, I think.
Maybe Dr. Stark wants to explain herself.
Yeah, I guess I have to explain myself, huh? But I do think, you know, I think I pointed that out because people do have, you know, there is the score range, and as was pointed out, hey, you can use the score range, and I know the scientific review officers and the chairs do try to encourage the reviewers to use the range, much like they encourage the reviewers to update their critiques after the review is done, and really they do work hard to help the reviewers one, you know, understand what that score range is, as well as understand, you know, follow those kind of best practices. But at the end of the day, it is up to an individual reviewer, right? I mean, and I think some things, and this is, I'm sure Alan could talk a little bit about this, and Kathy, because you all have seen a number of these reviews, but reviewers will have their own way of scoring. And while other reviewers may bring up, hey, or even the chair may say, hey, look, you're saying a lot of negative comments for a very positive score, or vice versa. Sometimes talking through that will help an individual kind of rethink their score and recalibrate. And I've certainly seen that as well.
The other thing that we do, and you're right about the recommend, you know, when you're listening to a conversation, you're going, I don't hear any positives here, or I don't hear any negatives here. And the panel will start taking that up as well and try and do peer pressure. But one of the things that SROs do is to maintain a list after the meeting to look at how the scores behaved. And we'll flag people and say, this person is a really tough scorer, or this person is a really lenient scorer compared to the rest of the panel, and even internally, you know, internally consistent. And if we find people that consistently do that, we will not invite them back. So if they can't do work within an acceptable range of how they score applications and how they discuss things and points they bring up, or if they turn in critiques that are kind of shoddy, eventually, you know, after 1 or 2 meetings, additional meetings, we'll look at them and say, this is not helpful. And so they won't get invited back. So there's a whole range of ways that we try to keep a panel on task and fair.
So this is Derrick.
Go ahead, Derrick.
I just wanted to add to what my colleague Stephanie was saying with regard to sometimes being questioned about the connection between your score and the weaknesses or the strengths. And I think that this is an important part of what happens at review, is that reviewers do say, or may be led to say, that they see some discrepancy between what's being said and the score. And sometimes that contributes to individuals scoring outside of the range. And that's why I took the liberty to score outside of that range, because I felt that they had a particular weakness that wasn't shared by the principal reviewers.
Thank you. I'm going to combine a few other questions on bias, but how does the review panel lead deal with some personal bias, that it seems to be more subjective and opinion. And how can you deal with the fact that sometimes people may have proprietary information that they can't unsee, but still may have a biased influence on their assessment? I was going to turn that over to Dr. Cooper, because I saw that you were confronting the panelists during some of those scenarios. So you want to add anything to that and respond to that question?
In trouble with your sound.
Looks like you're muted, Kathy. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I was eating pistachio nuts. This is what I get. I muted myself.
Sorry.
That's okay. I would punt this to Dr. Richon first.
I mean, basically, the question is, can we read minds? And no, we can't. If people come in with biases, those biases become evident during the discussion, then we have a chance to deal with them. If they keep them to themselves and you look at their scores and they're way out of range, that gives us an indication that maybe something's going on, but we really don't know what. So we can't be thought police.
Thank you.
And yeah, I mean, I'll add, some of the biases that people come in with are well known and out there, and it's really, part of the job of the applicant to address those biases. So, I'll give an example. For Alzheimer's disease, there's a lot of concerns about the fact that, that the known targets like amyloid hasn't worked. And okay, well, so if someone's coming in with an amyloid project, a reviewer could come in with a bias that that's just not going to be successful. Well, then it's really the job of the applicant to say, well, this amyloid project is different from other amyloid projects, and it's addressing amyloid in a different way than others have. And so, it really, as you're an applicant and you're thinking about what are the biases that could come up in discussion, think about that as you're writing that application so you can proactively address such biases.
Well, and I would also add, if there is a matter of debate in the scientific community, so if the scientific community is in the middle of a debate about something, chances are it will, and your product falls on one side or another of that debate, chances are the individuals on either side of that will be coming to that meeting, right? So you need to, I think, understanding that sometimes things, and the amyloid hypothesis is a great example of that, sometimes these things do, reviewers have differences of scientific opinion, and that is 100% allowed. I mean, there are differences in scientific opinion, and those are going to come out in the review.
Which also goes to the idea that we don't try to encourage everyone to come to an agreement during the discussion. We tell them that and give them the chance to vote outside the range so they can vote their conscience and their view of what the application has presented to them. And when the summary statements are put together, the SRO will explain that when this discussion started, there was a very diverse view of the application. And that view was somewhat mitigated during the discussion, and it was agreed that this, and this were strength, and this were weakness. But at the end of the discussion, there was still disagreement. And so you had a wide range of scores. And as a result, here's what the final impact was.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that I'd like to add is if you know that you have a divided field or two camps in a field, you want to be sure when you're recruiting your reviewers that you have all viewpoints represented on your panel and not just one camp, so that the actual discussion is more robust.
Yep.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge that we do have a fair number of folks who are potential new applicants and trying to understand more about the program. So I'm going to just turn for the next few minutes to a couple of application questions, and then we'll go back to the specific review questions. So one potential applicant wants to know whether there's a mechanism for the applicant organization to affect which institute NIH Institute application will be assigned to for funding. And if you have received funding from one institute, the second part, can you switch to another?
So yes to both. In the application, there is a PHS assignment request form where you can request a specific institute be assigned. You can also request multiple institutes if you think multiple institutes are relevant. In terms of, sorry, what was the second question now?
If you get funding from one institute for phase 1, for example, can you switch to another for phase 2?
So you should talk to the phase 1 institute, but you know, if things, and I did see a question kind of about things shifting, you know, you get new information in the phase 1 that leads you to pivot the project, you know, that's okay. You can, you know, some degree of pivot is allowed between the phase 1 and the phase 2. So it doesn't need to be a direct, you know, carrying exactly what you were doing in the phase 1. It still has to be, you know, follow-up development, but it can include a pivot. And that could result in, you know, another institute being a better home. So, you know, you can definitely discuss, I would discuss that first. If you're already awarded in that phase 1, discuss that with your program officer.
Excuse me, this is
I'd like
Derrick.
to add, oh, go ahead. I was going to add something about assignments. So why don't you talk about this first and then come back to assignments?
I was going to say something about the assignment, the request. So let me, I'll go first. Thank you.
Sure.
I think that it is an underutilized strategy in terms of requesting a dual assignment or even two other institutes to which to send your application to. I think that Todd was right by encouraging you to speak with the program official about that. And I would speak to the other program officials at the other institutes that you might be interested in sending or listing as a dual. This is something that I would encourage individuals to think about and to do. Thank you.
Right, and the point that I was going to make had to do with using that assignment request form to suggest potential institute assignments. We're totally interested in what you would prefer, but in the end of the day, we're going to have to assign those applications to the institute that is interested in your particular topic. Sometimes we make an assignment and the institute goes, oh, not us, and we have to change it. But we do try to assign multiple institutes when possible, as Derrick pointed out. There's only primary and duals, but we can put on as many duals as we want. And so there's many institutes have areas of science where they overlap in interest with other institutes. And so we can pile a few on there in dual so that other institutes other than the primary will see your science and see your application.
And I just put the program contacts for the SBIR STTR programs in the chat, so you can see a list of all of those. And if you're unsure which institute and center is the best, you know, after reading all the information and kind of reviewing it, you're still not sure, you can always reach out to multiple program officers. You can always do that, but you can also email us at sbir@od.nih.gov. I'll put that email in the chat as well. And that's also good for any other questions, just general questions you may have about the SBIR STTR program.
And I'd like to point something else out, is that it's not your responsibility to decide which institute you want. My group does make the assignments and we know what the institutes are interested in supporting. But the point is that if you do have a preference, feel free to communicate that to us on the assignment request form. But otherwise, we can take care of it. We know what we're doing.
Thank you. There was a question that was prompted by one of the review panels, and can you clarify whether preliminary data is expected on initial submission or after phase 1?
Preliminary data is not required for a phase 1 application. You have the option of presenting it, but you don't have to, and you cannot be dinged if you don't present it.
But it can help you if you do have it, because if you present it, it can be reviewed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Your objective is to demonstrate rigor of prior research. Now, how you decide to do that is up to you. You can use preliminary data, you can use literature citations, you can use evidence of trials or whatever's, but you want to show a very rigorous foundation for what it is you're proposing to do. and however you choose to do that.
And I've seen, I mean, and again, think carefully, what's really important here, and it kind of went by very quickly. So anything you put in the application can be reviewed. And that means if you put preliminary data, if you rush to put preliminary data in and way overstate it or try, they're going to review that, and then the reviewers can go, hey, we have concerns that they're overstating this preliminary data. I mean, anything that you put in there is going to be reviewed. Now, there was a question about phase twos. Phase twos are expected to have preliminary data because you're supposed to have the phase one data that you're going to then provide as the progress from the phase one, and even a direct to phase two, which is an option only in the SBIR program, should have phase one like data. So you should have done all the work for a phase one, even if you didn't get the phase one. So even in those cases where we have that special direct to phase two option, you should have all that you should have a good solid amount of data that you're presenting. So phase two is different from phase ones.
Thank you. Can you all speak a bit about how the primary, secondary, and tertiary reviewer is assigned? And are they assigned based on different aspects of the review? For example, primary for the scientific innovation, secondary for development pathway. Can you provide more insight on how those reviewers are selected?
Okay. Trying to balance the load is one aspect of it. So you're not going to give someone who's a commercialization expert all reviewer one assignments for 9 assignments, because that's just going to blow them out of the water in terms of the amount of time it would take to do that. So what we try and do is balance the need for particular expertise across the applications that we have in hand. And what that means is that, let's say we need a biostatistician to look at clinical trials. That will be one of the people that will be on the application as a reviewer, and they may be a reviewer 1, reviewer 2, or reviewer 3. If it is an application that, for example, has a bit of commercialization but not a lot, then we might have someone with expertise in commercialization as a reviewer 3 to add on their opinion to the science that's being done. So it all depends on what the application is trying to accomplish, how broad it is, what kind of expertise is needed, but the roles will really depend.
Thank you. Can you talk a bit about study sections and how those are assigned?
Kathy, you want to do that one?
Well, sure. So, you heard earlier on, Alan told you that the vast majority of small business applications are reviewed in special emphasis panels at CSR. And so each of those special emphasis panels, just like our regular study sections, have a set of guidelines that are published on the CSR internet site that will tell you what kinds of applications are reviewed in each of those. So what happens is when the applications come in the door, my team takes a look at them, makes an assessment based on the science in your application and matching that to guidelines of a study section, one of those special emphasis panels, and we assign it that way.
Thank you. I'm going to do some quick fire questions because I'm watching. We do have just over 15 minutes. I want to get to as many questions as possible. Can you speak to how much diversity is on panels and if the reviewers are volunteers? And then also there were observers in some of these panels. What is their role and who's allowed to be an observer?
Okay, reviewers are volunteers. They are donating their time and energy and giving back to the biomedical research community. And we can't emphasize our thanks for that more than we do. I don't know how we would. I'd like to hold a party for all of them, but we're not allowed to do that. But yes, they're volunteers. In terms of diversity, we go for as much diversity in every area that we can. And we try and represent the diversity in a particular discipline. So for example, in engineers, trying to find a hardcore woman engineer is a tough problem, and they're frequently overcommitted. So we can ask, but they may not have the time to do a particular panel, or they may not be able to join us. So we go as much as we can in the SBIR world to find minorities, women, and so on. But it's up up to the individual to volunteer to join us or not.
And on that note of volunteering, can people and applicants suggest reviewers? And what is the process?
You use the assignment request form and you can suggest expertise. Suggesting a specific reviewer would be problematic if you take that logically down the path and say, okay, I'm going to suggest my friend Joe whatever to review my application, and if I see Joe whatever on the panel, then I have a connection into that panel, and you get into a whole bunch of issues of confidentiality. So specific individuals, no. Expertise, absolutely.
And you had asked about people who, you know, in our mock study section, we had a program officer that was in attendance. And as you saw, the program officer didn't say anything. So I, as a program officer, when I was a program officer, I attended a lot of study sections, and I was there to listen and to kind of hear the conversation, you know, hear the conversations about the different applications that were within my portfolio. As a program officer, the only time I spoke up is if there was a specific policy question, general policy question that the panel and the scientific review officer had, either about the overall SBIR STTR program or the specific program announcement or RFA. And it was very, and the scientific review officer was the one who said, I would like you to answer this specific question. So the program officer is only there really as an observer. In very rare occasions, they answer a very specific question, but they don't weigh in. They're not allowed to give their 2 cents, none of that.
Right, and due to confidentiality, attendance at the meeting is really limited to people with a need to know. So that means basically the SRO, the reviewers, and relevant program officers, pretty much.
So I would like to comment here too, because one reason why we do listening, it helps us when we have to discuss the summary statement with you after you get your summary statement. So after you get your summary statement, you can call the program officer that's listed on the summary statement and discuss this, you know, especially the weaknesses that were highlighted in the summary statement, and that helps the program officer. We don't get to all the study sections, but we try to get to as many study sections as we can.
That's good intel. So the next question is based on review feedback that an applicant has received. What are the publication expectations for the SBIR program? We have been criticized several times by reviewers for not publishing results. Small businesses need to maintain a competitive advantage, and publishing results right away is not always in the best interest of the company.
Yeah, that's understandable, and you know, same thing with data sharing. There's sometimes reasons that can be stated why, you know, data may not be shared immediately, you know, for proprietary reasons. So that all is understandable.
And what if they get that feedback on the review and they feel like it impacts their score? What should they do?
So something that should not be a score driving concern, you know, likely would be stated elsewhere in the summary statement. But, you know, they can contact our program officer and have that discussion. And, you know, as you heard with, you know, when we talked about kind of a budget, there are things that get discussed in the review that do end up on the summary statement, but are not what affects the score. So, you know, that's a discussion they can have with the program officer, who can advise them on kind of how to address it in the future. But often, you know, probably not the reason that they didn't get selected for funding.
Yeah, when you get the summary statement, it's got 2 pieces to it. One are the comments from reviewers, and sometimes some bizarre comments can be made that the SRO doesn't catch. But what drives the final score is reflected in that summary statement, in the summary of discussion that's at the top.
Yeah, and I mean, that's an important point when it comes down to resubmissions, is that, you know, obviously the more weaknesses in the summary statement that you can address in your resubmission, the better. But because that first paragraph called the resume and summary discussion has the major score driving concerns, that's where you want to focus your efforts in terms of addressing in your one-page introduction to resubmission, the previous reviewer concerns.
And I want to state,
go ahead, Stephanie.
I was just going to state, sometimes I used to get questions around the criteria scores. So you will get individual scores for the 5 criteria. And people did try to add them up and average. And as you saw, that's not quite how we score, right? So that's not how your final overall score is calculated. And I used to have a love-hate relationship with those as a program officer. They're very, very helpful. They kind of tell you, looking across those 5 criteria, I used to tell people to use them to see where you're, where do you seem to have the most weaknesses? So say if you keep getting a worse score in approach, you might want to take a hard look at the approach. If if you're getting a really difficult score in significance, you might want to take a hard look at that and look at your section there. So they can point you to where your issues are and where your positives are. But again, they're not going to average and add up to an overall score. That's not how those are supposed to be used. Reviewers can weigh any one of those more than their other criteria scores. In addition, some reviewers, again, and you heard Alan there at the end pleading, with people, please update all of your comments, please update your criteria scores. But sometimes, people will update their comments, but will forget to update their criteria scores too. So just bear in mind that I think they're a guide. They're there to help you, but they're not the end all be all. They're not they're not used to calculate the overall score.
Also, when people do resubmission, they will say, well, reviewer 1 said this about my blah, 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 and here's what we've done to address that. The problem is that reviewer 1 may not be in the meeting again. And so trying to address specific things that specific people said isn't really going to get you anywhere. Look at overall trends. What is the trend of what's being told to you in that summary statement?
Thank you. And that relates to another question we got is, addressing a situation where 2 reviewers will feel like everything is adequate, in this case on human subject protections, and 1 does not, and they don't get detailed reasoning. Would you recommend that they follow up any questions with their program officer?
Yes.
Yes.
And yes. Remember, disagreement will always be normal. You talk to 3 people about anything, 1's likely not to agree with the other 2. So, that's part of, human nature. But, the summary discussion will show kind of, where they came together and what were the concerns that multiple people had that really affected the final score.
Thank you. And we've gotten a couple more questions about just the protection of information that is shared through the application review process. Are there reviewers working under an honor system, and do they have NDAs? And also, when you consider conflict of interest, do you also look at people who might be on the board of a company or an advisory instead of a direct competitor?
Okay. There are several documents that are signed by the reviewers, and one of them is a confidentiality agreement, and they can't even see the applications or the list of applications until that is signed. So that is a legally binding document, and if NIH finds out that it's been violated, we will prosecute. The next is the list. You take a look at list of applications and list of key personnel as a reviewer, and you identify the people that you feel you're in conflict with or the institutions that you're in conflict with. And that will get discussed with the SRO. The SRO is also going to look at your affiliation, and if there is an indication in the application that the reviewer would be in conflict with that application, then the SRO will place them into conflict. So there are multiple levels, and yes, it is an honor system, but there are consequences for violating it.
Yeah, and something that comes up all the time is applicants don't put enough in their application to, get a strong review and for the reviewers to identify the merits of that application. So, all protections in place. Of course, the applicant, has to worry about their own, proprietary things and protections, but important for the applicant to also remember that, you know, they need to put key things in there to demonstrate to the viewers why this is different and better than the alternatives out there. And if they don't, then they're not going to get reviewed as such.
The other piece is that once the review is finished, the reviewers have the obligation to destroy securely all of the information that they have been provided during the review period. So any documents, any score sheets, anything related to the review must be destroyed securely.
Thank you. Do you publish the cutoff scores for proposals that made it to discussions?
No.
Thank you. If a reviewer got corrected in his assessment during the discussion, say scored application lower because of absence of preliminary data, or for some other reason, would that score get revised?
Yeah, so that would be taken into account into the final score that they give, which is, if as you remember, we went around and we all gave our final scores at the end, at least the preliminary reviewers. But then everyone else on the panel will submit the final score, and that will be averaged to come up with actual score. So, you know, if they were corrected, they likely would take that into correction into the final score. As Stephanie said a few moments ago, they are instructed to actually then go and potentially change their comments and the criterion scores, but they don't always do that. So, you know, that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's something I don't think that we've made specifically clear is that, let's say you have a panel of 30 people. All of the people who are not in conflict are going to be listening to that discussion, and every one of them is required to supply a final overall impact score based on the discussion.
Exactly. Exactly. So when you go, I mean, there's two reasons why you can't just average the scores and come up with a final score. One is, as Stephanie said, the criteria. When reviewers give the final score, they're not giving each criterion score. So, you know, it's not a straight average there. But two, you're only seeing 3 people's scores. There are 20, 30 scores that are used in making that average. So, you know, that's why you it's not a straight average of the criterion scores that you see.
And generally people score based on which reviewer's opinion swayed them more. And so it might not be, you know, a perfect average of the scores because reviewer 2 was particularly persuasive to a larger numbers of the members on the panel. And so they tended to score more like reviewer 2 than 1 or 3.
And how do you take the scores? Are you averaging them out? Do you ever identify outliers?
Well, the preliminary overall impact scores are averaged to set the order of review. And then the final score is the average of all scores times 10.
And as you saw in the review, if somebody wanted to score outside the range, they had to give a justification. So in terms of the question about outliers, that happens in real time.
Right. And
the other
SROs
piece,
look for that too. When you're looking at the final score matrix that you get and you see a real outlier score, you go back to your notes and make sure that that person spoke up and had their opinion counted into the discussion.
yeah, one of the things we say for people that are scoring outside the range is, as Kathy pointed out during the mock study section, the reason that you're scoring outside the range has to have been brought up during the discussion. It can't be something that you know about and the panel doesn't know about.
Right.
Question about intellectual property. Is it advisable for the applicant to get a patent filed before submission of the grant application? And is one company saying they filed a provisional patent, but it has yet to file the patent at the end of the year? And is it a must that they disclose proprietary information in the application?
Unfortunately, Lili had to drop off. She would have been perfect to answer this. It really depends. I mean, I want to give a straight, you know, it really depends on a case-by-case basis here. You know, there is no straight rule that patents have to be approved or filed at certain points. So, you know, that's something you could discuss with the program officer before you apply. I don't know if someone else wants to add to that.
Well, if you're bringing a phase 1 in and you're doing exploratory work, the idea that you're going to have a patent is probably far-fetched. One, it's going to be too expensive to do that, to try and do a phase 1 application. So, you know, Todd's right. It's a case-by-case basis. What you're doing with patents is showing that you're protecting your intellectual property, and that's probably going to be more germane in a phase 2 or a fast track.
Right, and I wanted to add something about the intellectual property in the sense that you have to put, and I think Todd mentioned this before, you have to put enough information in the application that people can assess it. I remember one time squabbling with an applicant who was making a really fantastic cancer vaccine, but that's all he would tell us. He was making this fantastic cancer vaccine, but he didn't want to say anything about what cancer it was for or how the vaccine worked or anything because it was his intellectual property.
Yep.
And, you know, we kind of went round and round and said, you know, people can't tell whether it's a great idea or whether it's going to work unless you tell us what the vaccine is.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for all of the questions they've given. There are some questions that are specific to understanding the programs, and we want to show you the contact us for all of the institutes who are here and represented, as well as we have chatted out all of the NIH SBIR contacts. So feel free to reach out to us directly if you have any additional questions. We also wanted to remind you to—
And Monique, I think, Monique, NIA is on another slide, right? Because I don't see us on here. There we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And also, I wanted to note a couple of sessions. There is an application assistance program coming up if you're new and interested in really getting help on how to apply. We will chat out the link to register for that, but that is November 3rd at 2 p.m. Eastern. There's also a meeting coming up that will provide more basic information on the programs themselves. And that will be Wednesday, December 17th, and we will chat out the registration for that. With that, I want to thank you all for your time, especially our panelists and our participants. We appreciate the thoroughness of both your comments and all of the questions that we've received. And please, again, fill out that feedback form. We'd love to hear from you as we design more of these workshops. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all.